Mayor Colbert, the meeting is being live streamed and we just started recording, so we are good to go.
Okay, thank you. The PCAC meeting of Wednesday, March 24th, 2021 is about to begin. I will read a statement. As a result of the COVID-19 and Governor Northam's declaration of a state of emergency, the authority's Planning Coordination Advisory Committee meeting is being held electronically. With the recent passage of the amendment to HB 29, the FOIA bill, which allows regional bodies such as the authority and their committees to conduct business meetings electronically, this evening's business meeting is being held remotely. Doing so will enable us to keep safety as a top priority while ensuring that we're adhering to social distancing requirements. Meeting by electronic means is authorized because the items on the March 24, 2021 committee meeting agenda are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations of the authority. And I will call roll now. All right, Council Member Salonia Miles. Okay, Board Chair Libby Garvey.
Hi, I'm here, but I'm no longer chair. I'm now a board member.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's still
no, there's no apology. We just rotate. I've been demoted.
Okay.
It's fine.
Okay, thank you, Libby. Thank you. Supervisor Walter Alcorn.
I'm here.
Supervisor Sylvia Glass. Vice Mayor Elizabeth Bennett Parker.
I'm here.
Supervisor Margaret Angela Franklin.
Present.
Okay. Councilmember Phil Duncan.
Here.
Councilmember John Steely.
Here.
Vice Mayor Pamela Sebeski. Okay. And Vice Mayor Preston Banks.
I'm here.
Council Member Nalia Alam. Vice Mayor Marty Martinez.
I'm here. It's Martinez.
I'm sorry, Martinez. And Council Member Stanley Milan. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Okay. You had some summary notes sent to you from the February 24th, 2021 meeting. If you were not at that meeting, you can abstain. I'm just going to take just a aye vote. All in favor, say aye. Unless first, I'm sorry. Let me ask: are there any amendments to the minutes? Okay. Hearing no amendments, all in favor of those summary notes, please say aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Okay. I didn't hear anyone else. That's good. Well, those pass. Okay, moving on to our meeting. We have first thing on our agenda is Mr. Jasper, Principal Planner, Transportation Technology Action Plan.
Mayor Colbert, just a reminder, we need to adopt the resolution to conduct the meeting online.
I did read that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Oh, and I should probably say all in favor of that too.
Yeah,
correct?
I'll second it. Thumbs up.
Okay, right. Sorry about that. I do that at my council meetings. I forgot to say that. All in favor of holding this meeting electronically?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. That passes also. Okay, Mr. Jasper.
Great, thank you so much, Mayor Colbert. This evening, we would like to continue the discussion from last month on the Transportation Technology Strategic Plan. But this month, we'd like to touch on the action plan, which we did not discuss at your last meeting. I don't believe we sent this to you ahead of the meeting. We wanted to walk you through it first, and then after this meeting, we'll share the document with you for any formal reaction you have. As with last meeting, we're very happy to take any initial feedback that you have this evening as well. Next slide, please. Just before we get going, I wanted to share a list of abbreviations because this presentation does refer to a number of NVTA's committees and some other jargon that I don't want to confuse you with. So this committee, like the Technical Advisory Committee or TAC, both statutory committees required by Virginia Code. We also have the Planning and Programming Committee, which is an NVTA standing committee, which typically is the last committee to review documents or actions before they actually advance to the authority for action. We also have mentioning here, sorry, Haroon, your desktop is cutting in and out. Okay, thanks. Also, I'd like to mention the Transportation Technology Committee, which is an advisory committee that reports to Monica Bachmann, our Executive Director. And the subject of this evening's meeting is the Transportation Technology Strategic Plan, which we will frequently refer to as the TTSP for brevity. If you'd like any more information about any of our committees, there's a link at the bottom of this page, which you can't click on right now, but when the meeting's over, we'll send this presentation out so you've got that information and we can refer back to this if you need to. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just a very quick recap on the pathway to get to this point and what's left to reach approval of the TTSP. This is the process that started with the Transportation Technology Committee on a formal footing in December of last year. We'd actually been working with that committee for over a year to actually get to that point. And progressively, we've worked through the TTSP document, the action plan, and then during February and March, an expanded review with this committee and other committees. And earlier this month, we held a mini session on the TTSP at our annual NOVA Transportation Roundtable, and I know many of the members of this committee did participate in that, for which we are very grateful for your time and your engagement in this topic, and with NVTA generally. I hope you found that an interesting morning. Next month, we'll be coming back to you and the other committees with an action item recommending, looking for you to recommend an action to take to the authority for action in May of this year. And then as soon as we get to that point, we will begin to implement some aspects of the action plan, specifically integrating into transaction, which is our long-range transportation plan for Northern Virginia, which we update on a 5-year cycle. And currently that update is just getting underway. Next slide, please. I'd also like to just restate here the vision statement that we have for transaction, which this committee helped us greatly with during the fall of last year. And the vision statement is that Northern Virginia will plan for and invest in a safe, equitable, sustainable, and integrated multimodal transportation system that enhances quality of life, strengthens the economy, and builds resilience. This is something that I kind of drill into my staff to remember that everything we do in planning and programming is trying to achieve this vision. And I think it may be helpful for this committee and other committees to kind of also have that in the back of your mind, and that this is what we are trying to accomplish. This vision statement was approved by the authority in December of last year. A number of words here have been emboldened to kind of emphasize the way in which we're emphasizing certain things, which we've kind of addressed somewhat in the past, but never as proactively and explicitly as in this vision statement. And in particular, I want to mention the 3 core values that go part and parcel with this vision statement. And those core values are safety, equity, and sustainability, which are important to not just projects that the authority may fund in the future, but the whole process in which we develop transaction and subsequently our 6-year programs. Next slide, please. Thank you. So at this stage, I'd like to hand over the presentation to my colleague, Mackenzie Love, who will recap what we heard at your meeting last month and some other important information relating to the action plan. And then I'll come back after Mackenzie and round out the presentation. We are going to have a number of kind of pauses in the presentation so that you do have an opportunity to ask questions, raise any concerns or suggestions. I guess before Mackenzie starts, if there are any questions or comments for me right now, I'll be happy to take those before we move on.
Okay, does anyone have a question or a comment?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess.
Supervisor Alcorn, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the feedback slide, and I know this is a living document, very much so, and I love it. It's a fantastic document. Just the only other thing that I encourage for feedback, this was one of the things I mentioned, is I would like to see more emphasis on climate change in mitigation. I know it's there in different pieces, but after I've had a chance now to read through the whole thing, I guess I would just add to that. I'd love to see a little bit more priority given to that in terms of application of new technologies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor Alcorn.
Question, if I might.
Yes. Supervisor Garvey. Yes.
Thank you. Just real quickly for Mr. Alcorn, I've always sort of thought that is included in the idea of sustainability, but it might not be for you. So I was just checking that where you are on that.
Right. I looked at it that way too. But well, sorry. Go ahead, Walter. Go ahead,
yeah,
Supervisor Alcorn.
That's okay, Linda. Thanks. It's a great question, and we had an interesting related conversation at the COG Transportation Planning Board recently. Mostly folks on the Maryland side talking about it, and I consider climate as a component of sustainability, but one that probably needs, in order to especially address transportation as the largest emitter of our economy right now. That's what I'm thinking is it needs more emphasis. It's included under sustainability, but I would just like to see it be
emphasized. Okay, thank you for clarifying. I just wanted to check. Thank you.
Any other comments on what Supervisor Alcorn was discussing? And Mr. Jasper or Ms. Love, do you have any comments on that?
I certainly noted the comment, and we'll look to see where we can emphasize that more. I do consider that we are addressing it in a number of ways. I guess I should say, to be fair, from our perspective, that we're looking here at things that we can do with transportation technology. I think when you see more of the details that are related to our long-range plan transaction, there's going to be quite a lot of emphasis in there on climate change as well. So, this is a technology subset of that, and looking at things where we can related to climate change. And Mackenzie will touch on some of that in just a moment. We certainly note the comment and appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, just real quick, I'm sorry to hog.
No, continue.
Yeah, I think my concern would be frankly, I would not want to see us encouraging technologies that created more problems on the climate side. And I'll just give you one example. If, we end up with fleets of autonomous vehicles roaming around, or Ubers, looking for drivers, we need to, not every technology that comes along is going to be going in the right direction. And I think I would consider that to be a possible filter. I'm not saying we would never go along with any technology that, makes a bigger impact on climate, but I think that should be an explicit consideration. But so anyway, I'll be quiet, but I appreciate, Mr. Jasper, everything you said. Just thinking about it a little more.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for those comments. That's makes sense. Okay, continue, Ms. Love.
Thank you, and Supervisor Alcorn will be touching on this topic a couple of times again in the slides, so that's very timely input, and we appreciate the conversation. So just to recap a couple of the high-level things that we heard from this group at our last meeting, this certainly isn't all of the feedback, and we want to emphasize that we're tracking every piece of input, and when you see the next iteration of the draft documents, they will be commented in the document as well in an anonymized fashion, so that you can have that type of transparency. Just to highlight a couple of things, last month we talked about the manner in which equity is addressed in the current draft, and heard some affirmations from you all that we were headed in the right direction there. We also talked about increasing how we discuss the costs of technologies, and we believe that conversation could focus on the cost of implementing or perhaps the cost of using those as well. We also received some suggestions for additional technologies to consider or address in the TTSP. And we do have some large groupings of technologies in the current drafts, but there's so much evolution happening here in this realm all of the time. It's important to stay up to date. And then finally, we heard some suggestions about further encouraging demonstrations and test beds in the region. So we are working on integrating all of that feedback now. And Haroon, if you could take us to the next slide, please. Great. We also received some feedback, as Keith mentioned, during the Northern Virginia Transportation Roundtable that took place on March 10th. And it was a really excellent opportunity because there were 140 people who joined us, including 12 members of the authority. And I want to point out that I believe there are 4 members of the PCAC in attendance. So thank you very much for joining us there. And there was a specific mini session on the draft TTSP, and the concept was introduced by NVTA Executive Director Monica Backman, and then a summary was given by the Transportation Technology Committee Chair David Snyder. And he emphasized again the importance of being proactive in this planning effort and making sure technologies that enter the region meet our needs, and making sure that we adhere to those core values, which is something this committee has, of course, stressed as well. Haroon, if you could take us to the next slide, I will give you all a bit of an overview of some of the feedback we received specific to the TTSP, and then I'll open it to see if you have any questions or want to emphasize anything further that was discussed. During that mini session, we use live polling, which is a really exciting and engaging way to work with our audience, regardless of if they joined us on WebEx or on YouTube, to ask 5 questions related to TTSP topics. And 3 of them were multiple choice, and 2 of them focused on free-form responses. And those are the ones we want to highlight for you tonight because it gave us the most immediate feedback that was a little bit less constrained, so we could get people's thoughts on how to improve our drafts. The first question was, what innovative approaches can the region take to improve transportation equity in Northern Virginia? And we received over 50 unique responses, so you can again see how important and valuable this was. And there was, of course, a huge gamut of replies, but there were a few topics that kind of coalesced as we went through the morning on this question, such as beginning our engagement and outreach with asking and listening. And this is particularly important for historically underserved communities, making sure that we're listening to what they need first before acting. There were also suggestions to provide more service and access from multiple modes and improving safety through infrastructure, considering free or reduced fare trips, and providing reliable and real-time data to the public. And that could be so they could inform their trip-making decisions or plannings, or so they could learn more about other modes or projects in the region. So I'm getting a little bit of feedback here, but audio feedback. We always love feedback of every other kind. So the next question that we asked the attendees was, which safety needs in Northern Virginia could be addressed by emerging transportation technologies? And we asked people to please consider all users and all modes to make sure we're getting a full range there. And again, we received a wide array of responses talking about everything from mitigating the impacts of dangerous travel behaviors on the individual's parts, like distracted or impaired driving, or using data to really target infrastructure investment for safety related needs in specific areas where they can have the most impact. Also encouraging connectivity and working on any investments that we can do that would help reduce crashes, particularly between vehicles and people who are biking or walking. So with that, I will take a pause here and see if anybody has any questions about that feedback we've received or would like to emphasize anything that we've heard from you or from attendees to the roundtable a little bit more. Chair Colbert, I believe you're muted.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have a question or a comment for Ms. Love at this point? Okay. Okay, Ms. Love, please continue.
Thank you. Haroon, if you could take us to the next slide, please. Great. So now we want to talk a little bit more about feedback that we've received from other NVTA committees, including the TAC or TAC and the Transportation Technology Committee itself. One of the pieces of feedback was to consider rewording the titles of some of the 8 strategies that are included in the drafts of the Transportation Technology Plan that you've received thus far. And the reasons for this, there were 2 of them. One was to ensure that there's consistent level of granularity across all 8 strategies and that they're all phrased as strategies rather than goals. And then in one case, it was to ensure that the strategy could be flexible enough to adapt to the unknowns about innovation and potential for market penetration. So I'll walk through these the recommended revisions, and then I'll open it up for questions again, and we hope to have receive any feedback you have about this. This will be a very valuable discussion. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see the 8 strategies, which again are not listed in any sort of chronological or priority order, but just the order that they are portrayed in the current draft documents and numbered for easy reference. And that first left column is what you've seen so far. The column on the right looks at the recommendations that we have to you for how we could reword a few of them. And there are 4 that we are suggesting potential changes. So I'll read you what the current title is and followed by the recommended change. And then once I go through all 4, we can open it up for discussion. The first strategy in the TTSP is currently reduce congestion, and we're recommending rewording that as reduce congestion and increase throughput. Strategy 3 is currently maximize cybersecurity, and maximize privacy for members of the public. The suggested rewording here is pretty simple and basically for streamlining purposes, and that is maximize cybersecurity and privacy for the members of the public. Just removing a redundant word. For strategy 4, it is currently minimize potential for zero occupancy vehicles. So that could be an autonomous vehicle without a human inside it. That could happen if, say, an autonomous vehicle were to drop a passenger off at a location and then circle the block or drive by itself to find parking. We're suggesting rewording that as minimize potential for zero occupancy passenger vehicles. Now we're suggesting one additional word here being passenger, because there is the possibility that there will be autonomous vehicles specifically developed to deliver freight or parcels. So it could be groceries, prescription medicines, different things like that wouldn't, that don't, by their design, don't need to have a human inside of them. And we don't want to inadvertently preclude that use case. And so adding the specificity of zero occupancy passenger vehicles helps us narrow in on what we're really focusing on with that strategy. Finally, for strategy 8, it is currently create a network of charging infrastructure for use by private and fleet vehicles. We're suggesting rewording that to advance decarbonization of the transportation system. And part of the reason for this, there are multiple reasons feeding in here, but part of this is so that the strategy is capable of advancing and adapting to any changes in innovation. For example, electric vehicles are one option for alternative fuel that is receiving a great deal of attention in the Commonwealth right now. But there are also other technologies like hydrogen that might be become more feasible and have higher potential for market penetration as things advance in the near future. And we want to make sure our strategy can adapt to all of that, and that we're taking into consideration climate change as effectively as possible. With that, I will pause and see if there's any discussion on any of the 4 to be reworded, or if you have any other feedback about the titles of the strategies. Well, I see several hands visually, but I'll leave it up to Chair Colbert.
You know, I cannot see people. I can only see, I don't, so if you want to go ahead and call on them, that would be fine.
With your blessing, thank you, Chair. I saw Supervisor Alcorn and Ms. Garvey's hands go up. So I think we'll go with Supervisor Alcorn, because I think I saw your hands here in the middle as well. So.
Yeah, just real quick, you nailed it. Thank you. 8 does exactly what I was asking for earlier. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. It's just me and Walter here, huh? I'm fine with all of this. I agree 8 is a big, huge improvement. I will say 6, I'm still scratching my head on exactly what that means. I'm not going to mess with it here. My sense is that that probably could be phrased a little bit better. It just, as I say, I've just kind of get myself all wrapped up around those words. So that's just a suggestion, but I'm not going to try to wordsmith it at this moment, because, as I say, I'm not even quite sure what it means. So.
Sure. If you don't mind, I'll give a brief synopsis on that. But that is a good point, and we'll take that into consideration. So for those who might not be seeing this visually, the strategy number 6 is currently listed as maximize the potential of physical and communications infrastructure to serve existing and emerging modes. So there's a couple of things that could mean, and they're all covered in more depth in the description of the strategy. But an example of physical infrastructure that could support emerging modes would be if we're looking into connected and autonomous vehicles, they might need technology that they can communicate with in or near the road systems or other physical infrastructure. So you might need a communications cabinet, say at an intersection project, that would provide those sensors that your car could interact with wirelessly to make sure you're getting the safety benefits of them getting feedback from the built space.
Okay, so you need the internet structure to do that, and it's probably the same thing as making sure we have enough electrical charging stations for when we go to move and all of that. Okay,
Right.
I'm fine. I think what we want to, I think we want to make sure that we have when we build communication and infrastructure, when we build infrastructure, assuming both physical and communication, we want to make sure it can serve not only existing, but could, hopefully adapt for emerging. But I know a lot of work has gone into this, and you probably had 500 people telling you how to wordsmith it. So I'll just let it go. Thank you. That helps a lot too, because now I know what it means. Thank you.
Happy to help. And that 501st is sometimes the best. So please keep that feedback coming, but I'm happy to explain anything or improve. I think, let me try to move through all the little thumbnails I'm seeing here. Actually, I see another comment from Supervisor Alcorn, please.
Yeah, just a quick question on the first one. So reduce congestion and increase throughput. I know throughput's kind of a big word. It could mean a lot of things. Did the group or have you all explored using the word mobility there instead of throughput? The only reason I say that is we certainly have situations where, some of us anyway, are dealing with situations where especially vehicle throughput is not necessarily the end goal, particularly where we have, new communities and retrofitting old communities, but rather mobility is, so I don't know if that's, and I don't even know if I recommend that, but I'm just curious if that's been discussed.
Supervisor Alcorn, do you mean like pedestrian, bicycle? Is that what you're getting at when you say mobility over throughput?
Yeah, because I mean, there's some places where, frankly, we may not be looking to increase throughput of motor vehicles, but we are looking to, increase pedestrian usage or bicycle usage, and obviously those sometimes are in conflict a little bit.
Well, but that would cut down on the congestion. So to me,
right,
it makes sense too. That makes sense to me. I don't know, Ms. Love, if you have a different thought on that. I understand what Supervisor Alcorn's saying, but did you have a different take on that?
So my response would be multifaceted here. The first is we had not yet considered that wording, so thank you for the suggestion. And I certainly understand the reasons behind it, and it makes sense. The reason we had used throughput originally in this recommended rewording is that we wanted to make sure we're addressing all modes, and we recognize that especially during transitional periods as technologies are being adopted or more modes are starting to be offered, that there will still be personal vehicle use and legacy modes perhaps that are operating in a space, and we need to make sure that the system overall is operating efficiently and effectively for all modes. So that word was really trying to get at making sure it functions through those transition periods and for every type of road user.
And Chakabar, if I may add to what Mackenzie said, what we're really trying to get to here is, with the appropriate use of transportation technologies, can we improve the efficiency of the system without physically adding more lane miles, for example? That's really at the heart of this is optimization of system efficiency. But then, there I'm using a lot more words, but if throughput isn't doing it, then we maybe need to come back again and think about some more words. I'd also say that this is an important exercise because we want to be able to communicate what we mean in this document. So getting these words right is really important. The underlying work that's behind these, particularly in the action plan, probably isn't going to change a whole lot, and unless there's some major difference in emphasis. We think the real work that's behind these is relatively stable, but we do want to get the, even calling it wordsmithing, we want to get that right because people interpret words in particular ways, and we don't want misinterpretations of what we intend.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have a comment? Okay, I think we can continue.
Great, thank you. Haroon, if you could take us to the next slide, please. I want to now talk with you all a bit about the draft action plan. And we know you haven't seen the document yet, but we wanted to give you a good introduction to what you can expect and how to interact with that, that component of the TTSP, and it's the final piece. So what is the action plan? The TTSP, or Transportation Technology Strategic Plan itself, is a strategic document, and the action plan is what helps us bring it to fruition, what helps us make sure there are tangible ways of moving forward. So the action plan will address what needs to be done, but when and by whom, and so that's assigning responsibility. It also will make sure that each of the actions it's addressed can be traced to one of those 8 strategies that we just spoke about and might be reworded, and that you've seen here too, and provide some measures of effectiveness so we can monitor progress there. Some actions might be triggered by external events, and those could be legislation or market penetration thresholds. And what do we mean by that? It could mean, sorry, I'm getting a bit of echo here, but market penetration thresholds could be, have electric vehicles been adopted by a significant portion of the population? Are we able to see movement towards autonomous vehicles on our roads and changing that composition of our modal balance? So most of the actions that you'll see there will be initiated by NVTA staff, but not all will be implemented by staff. And that's kind of a recognition of the need to partner and work together with external agencies and entities, but also that some of these actions will need to be taken in partnership with the authority itself and other leaders throughout the region. This is something that we can't do alone, but staff will often get the groundwork laid and help make sure things are kicked off correctly. The action plan will also define how it will be monitored and provide a review and update cycle. I want to touch on here that this component of the action plan will focus on a limited set of the 9 roles that you saw in the draft TTSP, and it will provide the most detail on authority roles that address funding, policy, and advocacy, as well as staff roles around planning. And the reason that we're focusing in on those is that the other roles, which include championing, facilitating, stakeholders, acting as a stakeholder, outreach and education, and serving as an observer, will often be undertaken continually and in some cases serendipitously, so as things arise and create opportunities, and lay the foundation for other more tangible actions. In about 2 slides, I will show you a graph that we're calling the consolidated actions table, and it will provide a really good visual as to why we focus in on those roles, so that you can get a bit of more understanding there. I will pause here and see if you have any questions, but I do want to let you know that in the next couple of slides, I'll take you through the structure of the action plan and what the summary of each strategy will look like, and again, that consolidated action table itself. But I wanted to see if you had any thoughts before we do that deeper dive. Yes, Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, and not a question or anything. I just want to say I'm really pleased to see the 3rd bullet about actions might be triggered by something outside, which just, I mean, that happens anyway, to be intentional about it. I think is just great. So thanks for putting that in. Thank you.
Thank you. Just make sure, scrolling through the thumbnails at the top of my screen to see if there are any other questions. I think that's it. So Haroon, if you could take us to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a skeleton of the draft action plan. I'll first start off with an introduction, and that will just be about a page describing the intentions of this component of the TTSP. And that will be followed by strategy-specific summaries. So for each of the 8 strategies we spoke about earlier, you'll have an overview, a list of assumptions made, and the assumptions might be, we think that, based on research, of course, we think that autonomous vehicles will be widely accepted by the public in year X, or we think that the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic might last until year Y in this manner. And so they will list each of those, and they're specific, again, to each strategy. After that, there will be a table that lays out a mini action plan for that strategy specifically. And on the next slide, I'll show you an example of what this will look like and go into more detail. But after we've gone through the strategy-specific summaries, we'll see a consolidated action table. And again, this combines all of those detailed summaries into one place, so you can see when are we seeing synergies across these strategies, and when is action going to be taking place in a more holistic way. It kind of gives the 30,000-foot view. And I'll show you an example of that on a slide, and a later slide as well. Finally, the last component here of the action plan is next steps, and that will look at a monitoring progress and update cycle and provide some guidelines for the review and update process. And we'll touch on that at the end of this presentation tonight as well. Arun, if you could take us to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is an example of what a strategy-specific summary could look like, or will look like, in the current draft action plan. You can see here there's a title at the top, and we'll again refer to those call numbers, and then an overview of basically the time frame that we anticipate suggesting action for that specific strategy. And a relationship to the roles that were identified for NVTA in the TTSP itself. That'll be followed by those assumptions that we've made, and generally you're going to see 2 to 5 bullet points here, and they're rather high level, just to make sure that we're on, the reader is on the same frame of mind. I want to spend a little bit more time talking about this actions table here. The first thing to note is that on the far left-hand side, there's a column referred to as item. And here you will see something akin to 1A, 1B, 1C. And the number in that will refer to the number of the strategy. And then the letter will refer to each action suggested for that strategy will be labeled sequentially with a letter. And the reason for doing this is, again, not to put it in chronological or priority order, but just to make sure that we can reference all of these things in a concise manner in things like the consolidated action table that you'll be seeing next. The table then goes on to identify responsible parties, and usually this is the party that will be charged with initiating an action. But we also acknowledge again that everything in the TTSP will be built on partnership and taking a regional approach. So on the farther right of that table, you'll see a list, a space for stakeholders as well. The table will also show trigger points. And again, we think that might be either internal or external actions or happenings. And some of those are flexible, like market penetration rates, but some of them might be specific, like a transaction kickoff meeting, which we'll be having soon. Then we'll talk about timeframes, and that's how long we anticipate, that's when we anticipate those actions beginning, and they could be immediate, near term, midterm, or long term, and all of those are defined in the consolidated actions table, so you can see what exactly timeframes we're looking at and suggesting. Finally, the actions table here, again, for each strategy, will touch on the current status, and that could be internal to NVTA or things happening in the region. And then we'll, of course, provide a series of actions. So I'll give you an example here. An example here is that, an action could be integrating some more cybersecurity measures into any procurement activities or funding selection criteria. With that, I'll go ahead and move on to the consolidated actions table on the next slide, and then pause to see if you have any questions about that. Arun, if you could take us there, please. Thank you. So this goes hand in hand with the summaries that we've just gone over. And you can see on the far left-hand side, we have the 9 roles that were identified for NVTA in the draft TTSP. And those that are bolded are the ones that will focus that the action plan provides the most detail around. And again, those are funding, policy, advocate, and planning. And you can see that they have specific calls for action on the right-hand side of the table, which I'll cover in just a moment. The other roles that are not bolded, you can see that most of their action is on the right-hand side of the table is highlighted in this purple shade, which means that they could be undertaken continuously or as the need arises. And you can see this visual cue here shows why we've chose to focus the most granularity on the subset of roles. The next section of the table talks about the applicable strategies. And again, those are the 8 that you've been seeing through the draft materials thus far. And underneath the numbers for the strategies, you'll see that at the intersection of a strategy and a role, there are cells that include text such as 1A, 1B, or 4B, things of that nature. And those are referring to the specific actions laid out in the strategy-specific summaries of the action plan. And if you were to follow those to the right across the table, you'll see when tangible action is anticipated, or preparatory action, or maybe follow-up action, and how those relate to the immediate, near-term, midterm, and long-term timeframes that are identified at the top of the table. So that's a lot of information in one visual space, and I understand that text is very small, so I will give you an example here of how this might work out, and then I'll open it for questions about anything specific here or the information in general. So let's take a look at strategy 3, which you can see here in under the applicable strategies section of the table. And strategy 3, in case you don't have the full TTSP in front of you, is maximize cybersecurity and privacy for members of the public. So if we follow strategy 3 down to the first role, which is funding, you'll see that there is an action is identified there, which is labeled as 3A. So if you were to look at these strategy-specific summary for this third strategy, you will see that it is increased consideration of this topic in transaction. So if you'll look to follow that row to the right, you'll see that the first call for direct action in the darkest green in the table falls under the immediate time frame, and more specifically, the transaction kickoff meeting. So all of these can map specifically to things we know that are coming in the future or to time frames. Just to give you an idea of what metrics for success for a action like that, which again, increased consideration of cybersecurity and privacy in transaction, a metric of success could be incorporate eligibility or scoring criteria that relate to the goals of the TTSP in transaction. And another could be initiation of a regional conversation about cybersecurity and privacy with other partners. So all of those could initiate at a transaction kickoff meeting. With that example, I will pause and give you a moment to digest and see if there have any questions about that or any other information displayed in this graph. I'm not seeing any questions visually, but please, oh, I do see a question. Is that Cecile, if you would?
Hey, thank you. I just want to make a quick comment. I see lots of these charts that are very complex. I can follow this one. It's not, there's no perfect chart, but I can definitely follow what you're doing here. So really appreciate the way you've combined the information. Great job. I can certainly follow where you're at.
Thank you. Definitely take that to heart. This is quite a lot of thought and careful consolidation went into this table. But I'm certainly happy to explain if there's anything that's not covered here clearly. Great. Okay, so I think that's, I don't see any other questions, but please interject verbally if I've missed you, and I apologize for that. But you will see more detail about this when you receive the draft action plan. So this is just a introduction. Great. I think with that, I will hand it back over to Mr. Jasper to wrap up this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mackenzie, and thank you for that that compliment as well. We do appreciate that very much. Haroon, if you could advance to the next slide, and I'll go through the rest as quickly as I can in the interest of time. One of the questions that has been asked of us recently is along the lines of, if we approve this, what actually happens next? Which is a great question. Obviously, no elected official likes to vote for something where they don't actually know what they're signing up for. What we're trying to do with this slide and the next one is just quickly explain some of the possible outcomes that could arise from the action plan should it be subsequently approved. Via your recommendation and authority action. So on first off, and starting with some nearer term possible outcomes, Mackenzie's mentioned transactions several times. This is an area where we're keen to get going. It's not critical path, but it is becoming a little urgent now. In transaction, we will be undertaking some scenario analysis, which is a fancy way of saying sensitivity testing or sensitivity analysis. And in this, we actually look at alternate futures where technology or other external factors might cause us to rethink our analyses if different scenarios actually come to fruition, and a number of these are closely tied to the TTSP, and we want to make sure we're kind of getting a good synchronization between what we're doing in transaction for this and from the TTSP. We don't want to be testing scenarios that are no longer considered valid for the TTSP. We don't want to waste resources and time doing that. So some of the things we'll be looking at, and these are really just looking at sensitivity. These aren't kind of proposals or preferences, but they certainly could be in the realms of possibility. So incentives and pricing mechanisms to reduce car dependency will be a big one. Climate change and resiliency of the transportation system. New normal post-pandemic and what that means for perhaps increased work from home and e-commerce levels. Looking kind of slightly further ahead, although we're already kind of doing some of this at a fairly low-key level, from the point of view of outreach and education to Northern Virginians, what are the facts and the myths associated with connected, autonomous, shared and electric vehicles? We sometimes refer to these by the acronym CASE. NVTA's annual legislative program, all your jurisdictions have variations of the same thing, and some of the things that we could potentially include in future editions of NVTA's legislative program could relate to support for electric vehicle infrastructure, zero emission vehicles. These kind of speak to decarbonisation and more broadly to sustainability and climate change. Concern about zero occupant vehicles, or more specifically, zero occupant passenger vehicles. That's my nightmare. Vehicles driving around empty. We colloquially refer to these as zombie vehicles. There may be a valid reason for such things to happen, so we're not looking to necessarily prevent or eliminate that possibility, but we would certainly like to avoid vehicles just driving around for the sake of it, with nobody in them. Next slide, please, Harun. So some other possible outcomes, and these may be looking slightly to the longer term. We may decide that NVTA's project selection process through what we call our 6-year program, and this would be post the transaction update, for which we're looking at November of 2022. So in funding programs subsequent to that date, it's possible that we might consider whether NVTA funding should be contingent on something that would be consistent with this TTSP, or look to standardization of approaches to technology so that we don't get proliferation of different ways of doing the same thing in different jurisdictions, which would reduce the potential or even eliminate the potential for cross-jurisdictional synergies with respect to the deployment of transportation technologies. So, that's something we could consider as part of our project selection process. Obviously, funding is a big potential leverage for NVTA. As always, and the TTSP will not change this, the project list that's associated with transaction, and the current project list goes with the version of transaction that was adopted in October of 2017. The new list, as I mentioned, will be with the adoption of transaction in November of 2022 or thereabouts. That project list is the first filter for what NVTA can fund using its regional revenues. And I always say that since transaction is a fiscally unconstrained, somewhat geographically unconstrained plan, inclusion of a project in transaction is not a guarantee of funding. But if a project is not included in transaction, that is a guarantee that it cannot be funded by NVTA using its regional revenue. So that's something to keep in mind. And in that regard, we've been working closely with your staff over recent months to begin the process of refreshing the project list in readiness for testing through the analytical part of the transaction work, and ultimately towards finalization of that list when transaction comes forward for adoption. Finally, regional transportation policy. The action plan will not initially generate any new transportation policies, but it may generate white papers that are identifying potential topics for regional transportation policies in the future. Obviously, developing policy has to be a data-driven process, and NVTA's way of doing this is collaboration first. We certainly don't look to impose anything. It has to be, to the mutual benefit, not just of NVTA, but all of our member jurisdictions in the region and our regional partners. So some possible areas that are kind of technology related, shared mobility devices, that's jargon, more commonly known as scooters and bike share. Autonomous transit vehicles, we have a couple of examples of that around the region, and there's a potential role there for more broadly for first mile, last mile solutions that would encourage folks who would otherwise drive alone to look at a network of services that would help them to complete a journey without a car. I'm back to my zero occupant vehicles again, my living nightmare. And human services transportation as well, which is also somewhere where potentially we could help put together some regional policy on that to look at how those sorts of services can benefit from a regional deployment of technologies. Nothing here to commit the authority to anything in terms of actual policies or future funding, but areas where we think there could be some benefit to exploring. Next slide, please. In terms of the recommendations that we're going to come forward with to the committee next month, we will not be asking you to recommend the document, the TTSP document incorporating the action plan. That's really important background information, but it's a living document and it will continue to live until we reach the point where transportation technology stops evolving and innovating, which is never. So we don't want to ask you to tie us into a document which basically eliminates any flexibility we have to innovate and react as things go forward. So rather than asking you for approval of a document, we're going to ask you for approval of the 8 strategies, however they're worded by that time, and approval to begin the implementation of the action plan itself. With that approval, if the authority gives that to us in May, we will additionally provide a 6-monthly update to the committees and the authority on progress. We want to start by doing 6-monthly updates while transaction is being developed, so over the next couple of years. Thereafter, we envision probably moving to annual updates. But in these early stages, we want to be very responsive and transparent with what we're learning, what we're doing, and any suggestions we have for enhancements. Also, if approved, we will do something we haven't done to this point, which is begin to seek public engagement on the TTSP, or at least on matters relating to the TTSP. Obviously, we're not going to give the public a 100-page document to review and give us comments on, but we think there are ways in which we can engage with the public to get some valuable feedback. And we would do that as part of the already planned activities for public engagement relating to the transaction update. So we just embed some additional TTSP-related engagement into that process. Next slide, please. I won't really touch on this anymore. I think this really kind of speaks to what we're looking to do with the monitoring and update cycle. So if we could skip to the next slide. Just some very near-term next steps. So we'll share the action plan, the draft action plan, with you after this meeting. We kind of like to request a big favor is if you're able to give us any immediate feedback, realizing this is not much time and it could only be at a high level. But if you see some things, or following this meeting, if you think of some things you've not had a chance to mention, we certainly appreciate any feedback you get to us, by the end of the month. I think because this is a living document, we will always be taking feedback on it, but it would help us with our process if we could do that, so that we can share a final draft of the TTSP and the action plan in early April, so that everyone gets a chance to review it before being asked to make any final recommendations. Your next meeting is on April 28th, and at that point we'll be asking you to recommend action on the 8 strategies and the action plan for subsequent consideration by the authority in May. I think that's my last slide. So we'll take any remaining questions or comments. I understand there's been some chat box activity, which I have not been looking at. So possibly we could start there.
Madam Chair. And I know we're running late, so I'll just be very brief. Yes, I did put something in the chat. I know I'm not supposed to, but I did. But my thought is, it would be nice. One of the things I'm dealing with a lot as a local elected official in Fairfax County is making communities more livable, both new communities and some of our existing communities. Transportation infrastructure is a huge challenge in making that happen. So, perhaps there's another strategy for support more livable communities. By using technologies like noise cancellation and safety technologies, urban air mobility, things like that as another possible area. And maybe it's already incorporated in some other things, but I would just want to make sure that's on the agenda somewhere. Thank you. This is fantastic, by the way.
So, Madam
Supervisor.
Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think this is great work. I'm really impressed. I mean, it's such a clear structure. I really think it's going to help providing sort of an understanding as we move forward and keep us on track. And the only thing I'll dovetail a little bit with what Walter was talking about. Anyway, sorry if I call you Walter. Call me Libby. You know, I was thinking about our Vision Zero work that we're doing, which is, you know, trying to incorporate design and things to make sure that, you know, you don't have pedestrian collisions and traffic collisions. So that might fit a little bit in with the sort of safety thing as sort of an overall umbrella under, I guess it would be in safety. I didn't get on to mention it when we were in that section, but that would be maybe the only thing that I could see to add. I think it's, but I just think it's great work. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Impressive.
Okay, anyone else? Let's see. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jasper. I think that and Ms. Love, that was excellent. A lot for us to do. So you're going to be sending us something for us to look at and get back to you on April 1st, and then on April 28th will be you're requesting action. Okay, that makes sense. All right. Anyone else have comments or questions? Okay, and I think we still have Ms. Backman to give the NVTA update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in the interest of time, I would reiterate what Keith and Mackenzie stated. We really appreciate your feedback, your participation, and I do want to give kudos to Keith and Mackenzie. They've worked diligently on this, making it a holistic document, but flexible enough that we're not pigeonholed as things shift and pivot, and as we learn what works and doesn't work. So thank you to my staff, and thank you to you for your comments. We are looking at a May authority endorsement of the document, but again, more so than that May deadline, it's really about getting the document endorsed so we can start rolling it into the transaction update. Because as Keith noted earlier, we can only fund what is in transaction. And the other thing I wanted to note, there are limitations to what the authority can do, but this is why the committee is so important, because you and your local governments may be able to implement some of these strategies that we're unable to implement, and we in partnerships and things like that is very important. So thank you.
Okay, excellent. Is that it, Ms. Bachman? Do you have anything else?
I do not, Madam Chair.
Okay, all right, thank you. And does anyone else have any further comments or questions before we adjourn? I don't see anyone. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. You guys always do great work. You're going to give us some homework for us to look at. So if that's it, then good night, everybody. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good job. Haroon, you'll capture those chat box comments, right?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Good job, Mackenzie.
Thank you, Keith. If I might add, I think we're still live.
We are still live.
Okay.
No members present other than us.
We are live, yes.
Okay, let me stop that.